Hello, my friends. Welcome to Beyond the Past. Picture yourself standing on the deck of a wooden ship. The sea is dark, the wind is cold. Around you, there is nothing but water. You look ahead, but you cannot see the land. You look behind, and the land is already gone. The waves move the ship from side to side. The sky is covered with clouds. The stars are hidden, and now you have a problem. You do not know which way to go. For thousands of years, this was one of the greatest problems faced by human beings. People could travel along rivers, they could follow coastlines, they could watch the sun during the day, study the stars at night. But what happened when the sky became dark? What happened when the clouds covered the stars? What happened when a sailor was far away from land, surrounded by an endless ocean? How could anyone know which direction would lead them home? Today, we take direction for granted. We open a phone. We look at a map. We see a blue line showing us exactly where to go. But imagine a world without any of that. Imagine a world where one wrong turn at sea could mean disaster. Then, somewhere in the long story of human history, a simple idea began to change everything. A small object, a strange needle, a tool that could point toward a direction that humans could not see. The compass. And my friend, if you enjoy stories like this, you can subscribe to Beyond the Past. Here, we travel through the stories of people, inventions, and moments that changed our world. But the compass is more than just a tool. It is part of a much bigger story. It is a story about curiosity. It is a story about exploration. And it is a story about what happens when human beings learn how to find their way into the unknown. So, where did this mysterious invention come from? And how did a small needle help humans cross oceans, discover new lands, build powerful trade routes, and connect parts of the world that had once been separated? To understand that story, we have to travel far back in time. Long before modern ships, long before airplanes, long before satellites watched the Earth from space. We have to travel to ancient China. The exact beginning of the compass is not completely clear. Historians believe that early forms of magnetic direction tools appeared in China many centuries ago. At first, however, these tools were not mainly used by sailors. This may surprise you. The earliest magnetic devices were connected to ideas about direction, balance, and the natural world. People noticed something unusual about a special material called magnetite. Magnetite is a naturally magnetic mineral. When a small piece of it could move freely, it had a strange behavior. It tended to point in a particular direction. Imagine seeing this for the first time. You have no modern science to explain it. You do not understand Earth's magnetic field. You do not have satellites. You do not have digital maps. You simply see a strange stone that seems to know something about the world around you. Wouldn't that feel almost magical? People naturally wanted to understand it. Over time, humans learned that this strange property could be used. A magnetized object could help identify direction, and this simple discovery slowly became something much more powerful. But there was still a problem. Knowing that a magnetic object could point in a certain direction was one thing. Using it to guide a ship across a huge ocean was something completely different. Open sea was dangerous. A sailor could not simply look at the water and know where he was. There were no roads, there were no signs, there were no lights showing the way. There was only the horizon. The horizon is the line where the earth or sea seems to meet the sky. For sailors, the horizon could be both beautiful and frightening. Beyond it was the unknown, and the unknown was where opportunity and danger lived together. As maritime travel grew, the need for better navigation became more important. Navigation means finding and following the correct route from one place to another. Sailors developed many ways to navigate. They watched the sun, they studied stars, they remembered coastlines, they learned the direction of winds and ocean currents. Experienced sailors carried knowledge in their minds, but nature could be unpredictable. A storm could arrive suddenly. Clouds could hide the stars. Strong winds could push a ship far away from its planned route. And once a ship lost its direction, finding the way back could become extremely difficult. This is where the compass began to change the story. A sailor did not need to see a distant mountain. He did not need to see the sun. He did not even need a clear sky. With a magnetic direction tool, he could still have a guide. That was a remarkable change. For the first time, humans had a tool that could help them find direction, even when the world around them offered no obvious signs. But the compass did not immediately transform the world. It took time. The technology had to travel. People had to understand it. Sailors had to learn how to use it. And different cultures had to adapt it to their own needs. As knowledge moved across Asia and into other parts of the world, the compass slowly became more important for navigation. Think about what that meant. A sailor who once had to stay close to familiar coastlines could begin to think about traveling farther. A merchant could imagine reaching a distant market. Explorer could look at an empty horizon and wonder what existed beyond it. And suddenly, the world seemed a little less impossible. But here is the question. What happens when humans gain the confidence to travel beyond the places they already know? The answer would change history, because the compass did not simply help people find their way. It helped them become more willing to get lost. And that changed everything. As sailors began to travel farther, oceans that had once been barriers became routes. Trade began to expand. Ideas began to move. Goods traveled between distant regions. Cultures came into greater contact. And eventually, explorers began crossing seas that earlier generations could only imagine. But exploration was never a simple story of courage and discovery. It also brought competition. It brought wealth. It brought conflict. Powerful nations wanted control of new routes and new markets. And as ships traveled farther, the consequences of navigation became much bigger. The same tool that helped one person find a safe path could help another person reach a land where people had lived for centuries. The compass was opening doors, but not everyone who walked through those doors came with peaceful intentions. So, my friend, how did this small magnetic tool become connected to some of the greatest voyages in human history? How did it help sailors cross oceans that seemed endless? And how did the ability to find direction lead to an age of exploration that would reshape the world forever? The answer begins when the compass leaves the world of simple navigation and enters the hands of ambitious sailors, merchants, and explorers. And once that happens, the world is about to become much bigger. The answer begins when the compass leaves the world of simple navigation and enters the hands of ambitious sailors, merchants, and explorers. But before that happened, the compass had to become something more than a curious device. It had to become trusted. Imagine being a sailor in the Middle Ages. You are standing on a ship, far from home. The sea stretches in every direction. The wind is pushing your sails. The coastline has disappeared. You cannot see a mountain. You cannot see a city. And above you, the clouds are hiding the stars. Then you look down there. Beside you is a small compass. Its needle moves. It settles. And suddenly, you have something that feels almost impossible. A direction. Not a complete map. Not a perfect answer, but a guide. That small difference could mean everything. As the compass became more useful for sailors, navigation began to change. Ships could travel with greater confidence. They could move farther from familiar coastlines, and the sea itself began to look different. It was no longer only a dangerous barrier. It could also become a road without land, a road that connected distant places. This was an extraordinary change. But my friend, why would anyone want to travel so far into danger in the first place? The answer was simple. People wanted things. Merchants wanted valuable goods. Rulers wanted wealth. Kingdoms wanted power. And ordinary people wanted opportunities. Across Asia, Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, long-distance trade had existed for centuries. Silk, spices, gold, precious stones, textiles, ideas, religions, knowledge, all of these could travel from one region to another. But traveling by land was often slow and dangerous. There were deserts, mountains, bandits, political borders, and long distances. The sea offered another possibility. Ships could carry large amounts of goods. They could connect ports that were separated by enormous distances. But the ocean demanded something from anyone who entered it: courage, knowledge, and direction. The compass could not remove the danger. It could not stop a storm. It could not repair a broken ship. It could not provide food when supplies ran low. But it could help sailors understand one of the most important things in the world: where they were going. As knowledge of the compass spread, sailors began to combine it with other forms of navigation. They used the position of the sun. They studied the stars. They observed the movement of the waves. They learned about winds and currents. A current is a steady movement of water in a particular direction. Experienced sailors understood that the ocean itself was always moving. The wind moved, the water moved, the ship moved, and yet, with enough knowledge, humans could begin to control their journey through this moving world. The compass became one part of a larger system, and this system slowly gave sailors something they had never truly possessed before: confidence. Not complete confidence. The sea was still dangerous, but enough confidence to go farther. And that decision would have consequences. In Europe, maritime powers began to compete for access to trade routes. Portugal became especially important in the history of ocean exploration. Portuguese sailors traveled along the coast of Africa. They searched for new routes. They wanted access to valuable markets in Asia. They wanted spices. They wanted gold. And they wanted greater control over trade. The compass became an important tool in this expanding world of exploration. But it was never working alone. Sailors also used maps. They used instruments that measured the position of the sun and stars. They collected information from previous voyages. Every journey added new knowledge. Every new map made the next journey a little easier. This is how exploration often works. One person travels into the unknown, another follows, then another. Slowly, the unknown becomes known, and the map grows. But there was a darker side to this process. As European powers traveled farther, they did not simply discover empty lands. They encountered societies that already existed. People had their own languages, their own cultures, their own governments, their own histories. The arrival of foreign explorers could bring trade and exchange, but it could also bring violence, conquest, and colonization. Colonization means taking control of another land and its people. The compass itself was not responsible for these actions. It was simply a tool. But tools can change what humans are able to do, and when human ambition grows, the power of a tool can have both positive and terrible consequences. So, my friend, is an invention good or bad? Or does the answer depend on the people who use it? The compass helped people travel. It helped connect distant societies. It helped knowledge move across oceans. But it also helped powerful nations reach places they wanted to control. The story of the compass reminds us that inventions are rarely simple. They can create opportunities, they can create problems, and sometimes they can do both at the same time. By the 15th century, the world was entering a new period of ocean exploration. This period is often called the Age of Discovery. It was an age when European sailors began making long voyages across the Atlantic and other oceans. They searched for new trade routes. They searched for wealth. They searched for land. And sometimes they searched for glory. Among these sailors was a man whose name would become famous around the world. Christopher Columbus. Columbus believed he could reach Asia by sailing west across the Atlantic Ocean. His idea was based on a mistake. He believed the Earth was smaller than it actually was. But he was determined. In 1492, he received support from the Spanish monarchy and began his voyage. Imagine the scene. 3 ships, a vast ocean, no modern navigation system, no radio, no satellite. Only the knowledge available at that time, and somewhere ahead was land. But where? For days and weeks, the sailors continued. The ocean seemed endless. Fear began to grow. Some sailors worried that they would never return home, but the ships continued west. Eventually, they reached land in the Caribbean. Columbus believed he had reached parts of Asia. He had not. He had arrived in a part of the world unknown to Europeans at that time. His voyage would have enormous consequences. It would lead to further exploration. It would connect distant parts of the world in new ways. It would also begin centuries of European colonization in the Americas. The compass had helped make long-distance ocean travel more practical. But now, the world was entering a new chapter. Ships would cross oceans more regularly. Trade networks would expand. Empires would grow. And the movement of people, goods, plants, animals, and diseases would transform societies across continents. This global connection is sometimes called the Columbian exchange. It was the exchange of plants, animals, people, and diseases between the Americas and the Old World. After the voyages of Columbus, some of its effects were beneficial. New foods traveled across the world. Crops such as potatoes and tomatoes, became important in places far from their origins. But the exchange also brought terrible suffering. Diseases carried by Europeans devastated many indigenous populations who had no previous exposure to those illnesses. War, forced labor, and colonization caused further suffering. The history is complex. It is not simply a story of brave explorers discovering a beautiful new world. The people already living there had their own worlds, their own stories, their own homes, and their own right to live freely. The compass helped make these encounters possible, but the choices that followed were made by human beings, and that distinction matters still. The compass continued to change human life. As navigation improved, ships traveled farther. As ships traveled farther, maps became more accurate. As maps improved, people became more confident about crossing the world's oceans, and slowly, the earth began to feel smaller. A place that once seemed divided into distant worlds was becoming connected by sea. But the compass was not finished changing history. Its influence would continue long after the great explorers had disappeared. It would help build global trade. It would support the growth of empires. It would guide scientific expeditions. And eventually, the basic idea behind it would become part of the modern world of navigation. Yet there was one question still waiting. What happens when humans no longer need to depend on the stars? What happens when they can measure their position with greater accuracy than ever before? And what happens when the simple magnetic needle becomes the beginning of an entire science of navigation? The answer would take us from wooden sailing ships to modern transportation, from ancient discoveries to the technology we use today, because the story of the compass is not only about how humans learned to find north. It is about how humans learned to move through a world that once seemed impossibly large. And as the centuries passed, that little needle would continue pointing the way forward. The answer would take us from wooden sailing ships to modern transportation, from ancient discoveries to the technology we use today, because the story of the compass is not only about how humans learned to find north. It is about how humans learned to move through a world that once seemed impossibly large. Over the centuries, navigation continued to improve. Maps became more accurate. Ships became stronger. Eventually, airplanes, satellites, and digital technology transformed the way people travel. Today, most of us simply open a phone and instantly know where we are. Yet behind that modern convenience stands an invention that is more than 1,000 years old. The simple magnetic compass. Even now, hikers, rescue teams, and sailors still carry one. Because when technology fails, the compass continues doing what it has always done, quietly pointing the way. Perhaps that is why its story still matters. The compass did not build ships. It did not discover continents. It did not create trade or empires. But it gave people the confidence to travel beyond the horizon. And sometimes, one small invention is enough to change the direction of history, my friend. History is filled with inventions like this, simple ideas that quietly reshape the world without anyone realizing their full importance at the time. The compass reminds us that progress often begins with curiosity, with one question, one observation, and one person willing to explore the unknown. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the history of the compass. If you enjoyed today's story, please like this video and subscribe to Beyond the Past for more fascinating stories from history. And tell me in the comments, which historical invention should we explore next? Until next time, my friends, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep looking beyond the past.